you.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination?
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. My name is Brian Hyde, and it's my job to sit down a couple times a week and help navigate those unfamiliar waters of truth and light that our mainstream media is apparently determined to muddy, lest we come a little too close to the truth. Now, it's not always really overt. It's not always a matter of, they're just telling us big, bold lies that anybody could see through. Often there's a degree of subtlety, and sometimes there's some pretty actually really clever emotional manipulation that goes into their selling of a particular narrative. Case in point, as we talk about poison over knowledge, look at this headline. Actually, this is a story from Idaho Education News, idahoednews.org. Idaho's human rights educator is retiring early, seeking refuge from regulation that could force her to compromise her values. What a tragedy. I mean, right there, we understand. Oh my goodness, here's this wonderful person who's doing wonderful things and retiring early. Tell me more. Okay, well, idahoednews.org is going to do exactly that. But again, refusing to bend, the headline says, the Human Rights Educator of the Year will retire early. Now, I want you to pay close attention to the way in which her work is portrayed. It couldn't be more beautiful and flowery and helpful, and yet there's something that's more than just a little bit sinister behind all of that warm, flowery prose. Daisy Rain Martin has never been afraid to promote inclusivity in her classroom. Keep that word in mind, inclusivity. It's a very common catchword, and it's being used a lot to promote what many of us refer to as the woke agenda, which we are assured by those who purport to know that it doesn't really exist, but if it did, it would be a good thing. Anyway, a longtime language arts teacher at Valley View School District Sage Valley Middle School, Martin places books on her shelves that reflect the diversity, there's another word to pay attention for, of her classroom. She chooses curricula that inspire her students to think outside the box. And she encourages kids to explore, research, and think critically about the world around them. Isn't that just amazing? I mean, how could that possibly be used for any kind of evil purpose, or at least some kind of a underhanded purpose? Well, wait until you hear what some of the specifics are about what we're encouraging these kids to think, quote, critically and independently about. Her efforts have earned her statewide recognition. This year, she's the recipient of the Human Rights Educator of the Year Award, an accolade awarded by the Wasmuth Center for Human Rights to educators who go above and beyond to ground their classrooms in justice and joy and honor every person's dignity. Oh, I know, the left-wingers are starting to get a little bit trembly just hearing this. It's like a sugar rush for them. Oh, please, tell me more. Okay, so here are some of the specifics about what she does. But as the public education arena grows increasingly polarized and fraught with political tensions, championing human rights in the classroom has become a controversial act. Okay, there's the first act of subterfuge. Really, which human rights are we talking about that are being championed in the classroom that would be controversial? I wonder. I mean, after all, I think most of us were raised to believe, in the basic rights that we all share, the right to speak freely, to believe what we want to believe, to live, right? Our right to life, our right to justice, like real justice, meaning the powers of the state are limited over us in many ways. What could be controversial? Some conservatives would see Martin's teaching philosophy and her award as an example of alleged indoctrination in schools. Okay, but when you hear what she's advocating for, tell me this isn't indoctrination. And with the threat of policies and laws that would censor her in the classroom, really, censor or simply reduce her to teaching instead of indoctrinating or recruiting or grooming, and to put her at risk and putting her at risk of private lawsuits, Martin says she's had enough. She's not willing to compromise her values for politics, so she's taking an early retirement. This is her last year teaching. Now, I'm going to repeat what she says, but I'm going to repeat it without the spin that idahoednews.org is putting on it. She's not willing to give up her politics in order to actually teach. So she's taking an early retirement. She wants to infuse her politics into the teaching that she's doing. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to do so because there is pushback. And you'll see why. Martin says, I'm not leaving a bad place. I'm leaving a good place, but retirement will be a safer place. Again, there's no such thing as a woke agenda, but boy, she's doing a good job of using all the right vocabulary here. I won't feel any pressure to bend to things I know I will not bend to. Things like truth or reality or right and wrong. Representation in the classroom is a life or death matter, says Martin. Now, here we go. We're going to get into the thick of what makes her the Human Rights Educator of the Year. Martin's classroom is filled with diversity. Her students come from different countries, different states, and different religious backgrounds. Some speak multiple languages. Some are minorities. I know, it's like, really? So that's like the rest of the world too. Some are members of the LGBTQ plus blah, 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 blah community. You knew that was coming, though. As their teacher, and this is, by the way, who the focus goes to now almost entirely, Martin knows it's part of her responsibility to help them all feel valued. Another word they might have used is validated, but she'll say valued. If they don't feel safe at school, learning becomes even more challenging. Now, what does she mean by feeling safe at school? I don't think it's a matter of simply, well, I won't be picked on or I won't feel accepted. And again, I'm going to hearken to the idea. If you still believe that the LGBTQ plus community is somehow this marginalized, forsaken, no one accepts, them kind of group, have you had your eyes open at all in the last couple of years? Have you not seen the White House itself bathed in rainbow lights to celebrate Pride? Have you not seen the months-long Pride celebrations, or virtually every corporate entity and every other institution, short of maybe a few churches, celebrating Pride ad nauseum? It's, again, the facade is, but they're so picked on and they're so rejected by everybody. If that were true, we wouldn't have rainbows everywhere. It really wouldn't. I mean, the rainbows would be seen as something, less than, a reason to feel butterflies in your stomach. So, the idea that, well, they've got to feel valued somewhere. Trust me, there are plenty of places that they're feeling valued, but school, there's a reason she wants them to feel valued at school. And it's not because it's about feeling valued. It's about feeling validated and especially indoctrinated into a particular ideology, lest learning become more challenging. So she focuses on what she calls representation. She wants her students to be able to see themselves in the books they read and the materials they study. But that practice has brought challenges. Now, they're going to use examples here, like from course textbooks to the Harry Potter series. Martin has heard complaints from parents who believe certain materials aren't suitable for their children. When's the last time you heard parents complaining about it? I know some parents are a little bit leery of Harry Potter, after all, witchcraft and stuff like that. But that's not what has been bringing parents out in droves to their school board meetings or questioning the material that's available to them in school libraries. No, these books have a little bit more of an edge to them than simply, hey, we're just representing, what the student looks like. So let's dispense with the facade that, yes, certain materials may not be appropriate for their children. And here we are, boom, right back to, but the right of one student or family shouldn't trump the right of another student or family. And she's right back to, Martin says LGBTQ plus students should have access to books with LGBTQ plus characters. Latino students should have access to books with students who look and speak like them and their families. That type of representation can be the difference between life and death. Now, there's a major difference here between the ideas of well, we just need kids that have books with, someone who looks like them and speaks like them. Okay, that's fine. Someone who looks like you, that may be, if you are of a particular ethnicity, depending on the pigmentation of your skin, yeah, that's an innate characteristic, right? That's not something that's going to change. But the books that she's pushing and the books that they really need to feel represented are not so much about innate characteristics as they are about behavior. Specifically, I'm talking about the books that encourage kids to explore their sexuality, particularly to explore unnatural, deviant behavior as if it were just the greatest thing. And hey, your body's a playground, why not have a good time? It's a huge difference. You can't change the color of your skin. You can't change, the family that you were born into. But you can certainly choose what behavior you're going to engage in. And the books that we're talking about, the books that she's soft pedaling, it's just representing them, are books that are training them and teaching them and enticing them to explore behaviors that are actually beyond their maturity. Now, you don't have to be an old stick in the mud to understand that that's wrong. That's why we have boundaries. That's why we have definitions of right and wrong. Anyway, back to the article. She points out that LGBTQ plus youth and minorities are at higher risk for developing depression, anxiety, and suicide, especially in middle schoolers who are already prone to low self-esteem, and mental health challenges. But as lawmakers attempt to place restrictions on what can and can't be read and said in schools, Martin says educators are sitting in a difficult position. Now, again, I have no doubt youth and minorities, especially middle school youth and minorities, are prone to low self-esteem and mental health challenges. I think most of us can remember those years. And if we were to be given a redo of our lives, that's the part we would probably want to fast forward through. It's a hard time. You have enough awareness and enough maturity to make more of your own decisions, but not enough wisdom and not enough judgment, solid judgment to make good decisions. And for a lot of us, our first bad choices usually came about middle school age. Now, having said, we're very uncertain of who we are. So that's all fine and dandy as far as, that's part of the development process. Great. But when you talk about LGBTQ plus youth and minorities being at higher risk for depression, anxiety, and suicide, again, it's not because they're not accepted in society. I mean, is it just possible that they're being encouraged to embrace behaviors and a mindset that is prone to unhappiness, rejection, failure, self-doubt? I'm not saying this to rub salt in their wounds. I think this is a very real challenge for them. But to encourage them to embrace it as, oh, it's good, and you just need to lean harder into it. No. They actually need a more clear understanding of appropriate versus inappropriate, and waiting until they have, the maturity to be able to carry the decisions that come with certain types of behavior. And yes, I'm talking about sexual behavior. So this puts educators in a difficult position. Well, educators who are trying to indoctrinate them or otherwise entice them into that kind of behavior. We have two choices as teachers, Martin says. Eliminate anything that might bring down the wrath of a stakeholder, which at the end of the day includes just about everything, and participate in the erasure of minorities and marginalized kids. Really? Is that what that is? Or walk around flinchy all the time waiting for the other shoe to drop? That's a classic false dilemma. You do realize that, right? These are the only two possible choices. Look, you're either all about, marginalizing and erasing minorities and kids, but with your wrath, over something that may not agree with you, or we just have to walk around. So either we embrace everything that she is trying to bring into the classroom, appropriate or inappropriate, or we're just all about erasing them. Okay, that's a very simplistic point of view. It's worthy of a Sith Lord, perhaps. Everything is an absolute. You're either this or you're that. You're either with the terrorists or you're with us. In the real world, where adults and where mature people with actual thinking minds live and reside and presumably use their faculties, there are always more choices. And there's no reason for these kids to feel marginalized if they're not being shown graphic depictions of what oral sex is like with same-sex partners or with, friends or family or whatever. Some of the material that has been put in front of kids, aimed at kids in order to, help them see the real them is just perverse beyond words. But we're being told if we don't show them that, well, they're going to feel like they're being erased or they're being marginalized. You don't have to be affirmed every second of every day, even when you're going through periods of self-doubt. But what you do need are some clear guidelines and sometimes some guardrails along that way to keep you from straying off into the weeds or off the edge of a cliff from which you can't easily return. So this is a false choice. And you can know it's a false choice by the fact that, you're only given two options as if there could be no other. That is the epitome of a false dilemma, and that's what she's offering. There are always more choices. And I don't believe that the people who are trying to restrict some of this material from being put into school libraries and taught in school classrooms are trying to make it into just a binary choice like this. There are appropriate things and there are inappropriate things. And there are always going to be things that are taught in the classroom with which some people are going to disagree. And that includes people in the very moderate parts of society. We don't always see things from the same perspective, but we can agree kids need to be allowed innocence as long as possible. The world's going to try to beat it out of them anyways. Why do we want to take it from them so soon? Martin seeks refuge in retirement, the article tells us, because she's better unfettered. I bet. At the end of this school year, Martin will retire. She's seeking refuge from legislation and policy that could force her to compromise her values of indoctrinating kids into things that are probably against their parents' values. Because if the time came, Martin said she wouldn't bend to rules that would force her to eliminate books from her shelves or censor her speech in her classroom. She wants to be free to teach whatever subversive topics and subversive ideologies she wants to teach with no repercussion whatsoever. That's not why she's there. That's not why she's an educator. When you're on the side of love, compassion, mercy, justice, all of these things, it's easy to feel like you're swimming upstream because, she's so heroic after all, and humble too. I mean, look at this. But once you get in a place where everyone loves everyone and everyone is committed to justice and mercy, you need that. We all need that. I'm sorry. I should have warned you to take a gag suppressant before sharing that last bit with you. But look, it's very flowery prose. Oh, it's so full of feelings. The emoting is almost tangible. But that's not what's happening in classrooms. That's not the way that it's not everyone loves everyone. Let me give you an example of why I say that. So this is from a recent article from AmericanThinker.com. Actually, first, a tweet from Elon Musk. Instead of knowledge, schools pour poison into the ears of our children. That's a provocative thing, but it's right. What she's pouring is poison. It's not knowledge. It's not learning. It's poisonous ideology. Now, it's leftist ideology, and it needs to be called what it is. This is from an article by Percy Sinclair in AmericanThinker.com. Most normal Americans have started understanding that diversity is a common Marxist buzzword. When a Marxist uses the word diversity, he does not mean the standard definition. What the Marxists mean is conformity. That's everyone loving everyone. We all agree, right? Everyone must conform to what the Marxists say is true. Marxism thinks it's building toward utopia, but believes that utopia cannot be achieved unless everyone is striving toward the same goal. There can be no dissent, not even by a single individual. Thus, the modern Marxist operates under the logic of Herbert Marcuse's infamous essay, Repressive Tolerance. Movements from the left must be tolerated, no matter how violent, and I would add, how perverted, but movements from the right must be pre-censored so that even the offending thought does not enter a person's head. The demand for ideological conformity has dominated our state universities since the 1960s. Now, why is that important? Okay, it's because school choice it's becoming a pretty big issue, and it's going to be back on, it's back on the radar screen as soon as the legislature meets again this year in Idaho. I think it's also a move in the right direction, but what Percy Sinclair is warning about here is school choice alone is not going to solve the problem. And the reason for that is because the teachers that are being churned out by the universities, the teaching colleges at our nation's universities, and there's 1,500, 1,400 of these different colleges, are very Marxist. They're just like this educator of the year. So, we've got to consider, how do we solve that problem? This is how Percy Sinclair puts it. School choice won't save us. In an ideal world, school choice is a wonderful solution, but this is not an ideal world. Even if school choice laws are passed in every state and territory, the problem is not the public education system. That system is only as good as the teachers and administrators who run it. If we successfully enact school choice laws that will enable the rise of charter and independent schools, then the question arises, where will the teachers come from? And the problem here is if they're coming from the same Marxist indoctrination centers, universities, as their public school counterparts, we're still stuck with the same problem. So school choice is part of the solution, but it's not the whole solution. And by the way, this seems like a wonderful endorsement for homeschooling as well. That really seems like the best way to truly educate your kids without having to worry about, state manipulation or indoctrination or otherwise interference at any level. Now, I know there are people will they be properly socialized? If what you mean by socialized is what Ms. Martin is pushing, that inclusivity that would blur the line between right and wrong and actively encourage kids to reject everything that their parents and those who came before them have taught them about right and wrong, yeah, then I think separation of school and state is probably a good idea. At the very least, it makes it harder to politicize topics, which makes it harder to turn things into a political, confrontational kind of thing like we've seen. So it would solve her problem as well as a lot of other people's problems. A little something to think about as we consider the choice of poison over knowledge as to what we're pouring into our kids' ears. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
that